We could solve the world's problems if we just sat in front of microphones and drank alcohol.
Dude, we should start a podcast.
All right, it's all you.
You're listening to a Christian and an atheist walk into a bar. With me, as always, is Ty. If there's a Will, there's a Farrell Gallenbeck, and and myself, Jay, Destiny's only child, Stooksbury. And today, as you couldn't tell already, we're going to talk about the debate between free will and destiny, or fate, or determinism, whatever you want to call it.
That's right. So this actually was sparked. Before that, I guess we should talk about what we're drinking.
Right. What did fate bring to us in our glasses here?
That's right. And considering we had a tough time deciding tonight, maybe it was fate. We ended up with the Oscar Blues 1050 Imperial Stout, aged in bourbon barrels.
I don't think you're saying that right.
Which one?
That's 1050.
1050. 50 cent. Trying to get gangsta. So 1050 barrel aged. We're on a barrel aged kick, apparently.
Yeah.
We've been buried in snow here in Colorado, so it makes sense.
Yeah, we like our dark beers this time of year.
That's right. It doesn't give me much more info than that.
Yeah.
No.
Well, Oscar Blues is always it's one of my favorite breweries.
Yeah, they are always solid.
And I think 1050, it was either 1050 or oh gosh, I'm having a brain fart. What's their Scottish ale?
The green can.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh, I gotta Google that really quickly. Talk amongst yourselves.
We did a lot of research going into this one, just so you all know.
Yeah. No. A bit long story short. It's always been one of my favorite breweries, and they always do something. They take those kind of traditional standards and really make it their own. Old Chub.
There it is.
Thank you, Googles.
All I remember is Mama's Yellow Pills or whatever. That's a go-to during the summer on fishing trips. Mm-hmm. So, but this is good.
Yeah.
It's definitely, it's got that rich cocoa stuff, but you wouldn't want to be drinking this in the summer, I don't think.
No. It's. I will freely admit it's not as good as the one we had last time, though.
Yeah, the Goose Island one. Yeah.
Which pains me to say that,
but we're not going to get into the corporate beer.
No.
On this episode.
No. So I guess it helped to start off. What's inspired this episode?
Yeah. So I put about 1,800 miles in about 4 days. Last week and listened to countless hours of podcast. And one of them that I ended up listening to the most was This American Life, which is always fantastic. But on one of their episodes, they had this, it was almost like an afterthought, it seemed like, where it was talking about one of the employees at This American Life didn't believe in free will and went on to talk about at a molecular level how basically he explained that there was no free will. And so I sent it to Jay, he listened to it, and then here we are to talk further.
And it's funny too because the first part of that episode is all about Newt Gingrich and Rush Limbaugh and this and it was funny when you gave me the episode to listen to, I was like, I'm not sure this is the right thing he meant to send me, but you're right. It's at the very last, I think, like 15 minutes of this episode where they talk about it to kind of like loop it back around to the first conversation. And it's an age-old debate, right? Like it's as old as philosophy is do you have, and I guess it helped to kind of frame the conversation, what do we mean by free will? What do we mean by fate? And I think the way that we view free will is, do you have the agency to determine the outcomes of your life,
Right.
and or are things predetermined for you? I
Right.
think is kind of the easiest way to kind of frame that conversation. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think, I mean, I don't know how you took the snippet from This American Life, but in that it was almost implying that it's all randomness more so than choices. Like
Mm-hmm.
your body at a molecular level is causing you to make the decisions that you are
Mm-hmm.
without you having any impact on them,
Right.
basically, which I thought was that was a different take than I had heard,
Mm-hmm.
and just the free will fate debate.
Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the time this debate ends up in these both really kind of reductionist sides of the spectrum.
Hey, that's
Best.
weird. That never
I
happens.
know who'd have thought? Because I've heard this. I don't know if you listen to Sam Harris at all. It's another podcast to check out. He talks a lot about free will, and he always refers to it as libertarian free will. It's the concept that we have complete agency to control everything in outcomes of our lives. And then he always kind of he sets up this straw man to beat up, you know. And I don't know if there's anybody that really is actually making that argument, you know, because I think at a certain level everything is, you know, it's somewhere in between, right? Like
Right.
it's not the black or the white, it's the gray. And the This American Life episode really focused it on the other side of it, where they said there's no such thing as free will. Basically, it boiled everything down to all of our mental synapses and everything that happens to us on a neurological level is already hardwired into our brain, which is the result of our genetics. And everything that we do in the physical world is completely predetermined by gravity and, you know, all those physical
Right.
elements. And I think if you boil all those things down, like they just don't matter. You know what I mean? Like you can take that argument so far where it just gets, like I said, really reductionist, and it doesn't really bring much meaning to the conversation. You
Right.
know? So I guess what I'm kind of curious about is that free will plays a really big part, especially in the Christian faith,
Right.
and and I think you have a take on free will that doesn't necessarily mesh with that. And I was hoping you can kind of talk to those points.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is, and the people that know me will tell you that I have discussed this and studied this at length. It actually started in college with a professor posing the question about God. If there is an omnipotent God who knows the decisions you're going to make before you make them, do you actually have free will?
Mm-hmm.
And so that became a topic of debate, and it was something that I desperately need to answer for myself, because, in my opinion, if we are all predestined to either, be terrible people or good people, then what's the point of all of this? Was
Mm-hmm.
kind of where I settled. And so I had
Mm-hmm.
to come up with an answer for this. And so my view on free will is, I mean, the easiest way for me to describe it usually to people, if they have seen the Men in Black like movie where there's the little guy that can see the future for everything, and he's constantly going like, is this the one where,
Mm-hmm.
and it's all these different views on what the future looks like. For me, I think God sees every possible decision we could ever possibly make, which means he knows every possible outcome there is, but not the individual decisions that would lead us to those moments. And so that allows for omnipotence at a greater level than I think is often taught in church,
Mm-hmm.
but also allows for there to be free will.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of an interesting take too, because that actually jives with what a lot of new atheists refer to as the multiverse. You know, there's infinite amounts of possibilities to every sort of interaction. That there is the possibility of me just getting up and leaving right now and what happens in that universe versus me continuing to sit
Right.
here and continue this conversation where I go out there and I get hit by a car and then here I'm just sitting here drinking beer with you. Like, and those all play out into a really strange and dynamic way of thinking about how the world interacts with each other
Right.
too.
And I've always argued, and when it comes down to it, like the thing that I always try to land on is like, we don't know. We don't
Mm-hmm.
freaking know.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really freaking matter. But I do think it's important to understand your worldview. And so
Mm-hmm.
having these answers. But I would definitely say, that's closer. And I've argued that by eliminating God's knowledge of individual decisions, it actually makes his omnipotence seem broader.
Mm.
Um, but that has created conflict at different times in my life.
Sure. And I think that's the one thing that's interesting about the conversation about if there is no free will, then how do you explain? So if there is no free will and everything's predetermined, then why can't we predict how things are going to happen? You know what I
Right.
mean? And I think there's a limit to our knowledge base of what that can look like. You know, there's only so much that we can do to figure out how things interact with each other, how people interact, how we interact with our environment, and it's the multiplicity of it all that really is incalculable. Like, you can't. There's no way of really figuring out how all those parts interact with each other. You know,
Right.
so. But I think you brought up a point too about if we're already just predetermined to do everything, um, then what's the point of morality?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean for the judicial system? If you are predestined to be a criminal, um, what's the point of trying to reform someone? Or does it make a better case for uh, people are like this and we have to treat them in a different way? You know what I mean? Like, so where do we draw that line of moral agency versus how the environment has turned someone in a certain direction?
Right. Well, and Calvinist, who are the Christian sect that believe everything is predetermined, would argue that you're still playing a role in those situations by acting out in those.
Mm-hmm.
And so they would say, by trying to reform someone, you are playing out your role in this,
Mm-hmm.
divine plan to get someone off of that path, and that was all part of the plan as well from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
um, which seems crazy to me. Like, I don't track with that as well, but I think that's where they would say that that goes. But it does create, if it's all at a molecular level and
Mm-hmm.
everything is going to happen no matter what, then
Mm-hmm.
it does create some interesting questions with legal system and laws and
Mm-hmm.
judging people based on their immorality or their morality and all those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my wife actually made a really funny point before I came over here. She's a big fan of CSI, and I told her about what we were talking about. She said, "Well, I think the first thing you should mention is that if you're within the first 5 seconds of a CSI episode, you're actually destined to die." So, but all kidding aside, like, I think it's interesting to talk about. Okay, so if it is at a molecular level where we're doing certain things, then and I think a lot of times it's really jarring to think that we don't have free will. Like, I don't have the ability just to, like I said, get up and leave right now. Um, but I think there is an element that we just can't necessarily account for. You know what I mean? Like, kind of what you said, who knows?
Right.
Um, like, I think about it sometimes. So I've taken on, like, trying to be better about my health and exercise and things like that. And I can see myself, like, as you get older and your metabolism slows down, if I didn't get up at like 5 in the morning to, like, go for a run or do something, I could see like 10 years down the road of me being like 50 pounds heavier. You know what I
Right.
mean? Because you can't get me to diet. I'm sorry. That's like the last thing. I basically like to exercise so I can eat like crap. But
I am the same way. My wife is a dieter, but
yeah,
not
I
me.
just can't do it, man.
Yeah.
I don't have the willpower. I'm destined to eat, like this, I
Right.
think.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I do see that if there's those moments, between 5 o'clock and 5:05 when I'm staring at the clock and be like, it'd be so nice just to stay in bed and not get up and not do it.
Right.
And I can then also see, like, I have some family that I know that struggle with weight and things like that are in me, right? Like,
Right.
there's some genetic coding that makes you predisposed to heart disease and diabetes and
Hmm.
weight gain and things like that. But you have some ability to push against that. You know what I mean? You don't necessarily have to give in to that. And I saw a quote before I came over here that kind of helped me frame this a little bit better, is that you can control 100% of your effort that you put into something, but you can't control the outcomes of it.
Okay.
Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. All right. So I want to, this may be backtracking just a little, but I think based on the nature of this. So, from your perspective, I mean, from a religious perspective, we constantly wrestle with the idea of free will, predestination, those kind
Hmm.
of things. But from your perspective, where has your worldview landed you on this idea?
Well, I actually have always been a little bit on more of the determinist side. You know what I mean? Because you don't get to pick when you're born. You don't get to pick which historical period you're born into. You don't get to pick what country you're born into. You don't get to pick your parents. You don't get to pick any of this, like, genetic coding that makes up so much of who you are as a person.
Right.
Like, they talk about, they've done those studies where they separate twins, twins that are reunited later in life, and they find that they have, like, they're the same habits, like they smoke, or they chew their nails, or they're really enjoy vacationing in Florida. Like, there's all these random things that are really deeply encoded into our molecular beings.
Right.
Like I hate to use the term hardwired, but we are kind of hardwired in certain ways. um, and I do think your worldview is really shaped by all those factors accumulating. And you think about it too, the way we usually talk about how people react to certain things. We always talk about nature or nurture, right?
Right.
Those are two very deterministic ways of how we view the world. You're either born this way or you're raised this way,
Right.
and there's not a lot of way of wedging in your ability to be a free person to make those things happen. Um, but as you get older, as you take on, like, more responsibilities, you tend to view the world a lot differently in the concept of where are you in this world and where do you contribute to it. Um, because I do think that you have to have some. If everything's, like I said, if everything's predetermined, then why bother getting upset about something? Why bother thinking you can fix something? Why bother trying to teach your kids to do the right thing? Um, and so there's that element that maybe it's an illusion. Maybe it seems like the guy from American Life was saying, it's just an illusion of choice. But I do think we have some choices to make. Like, I could sit here all afternoon and drink beer with you, and then go home and pound another bottle of whiskey and go to bed and get up and kind of be a dysfunctional person and neglect my kid, neglect my other responsibilities. And I think that there's a balance to that. Like, everyone has some predisposition to certain negative qualities, but I think we still have some ability to avert some things. Like, there are some things that we have some choices in. I'm kind of struggling in defining it, because I don't really know how else to really frame that, what that actually is. Is it free will? I don't know, but it does seem it's something that gives you more meaning to your life too, right?
Right.
Like, I don't feel like, if there's no such thing as free will, then I don't know what inspires people to get up in the morning to do something, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the argument then becomes like that's part of the genetic makeup is that
Right.
that inspiration comes from something
Mm-hmm.
deep within you that creates this like fight for life kind of response
Mm-hmm.
basically, because I mean when you talk about your working out, like really that's a fight to stay alive
Sure,
and have a
absolutely.
better life and all of
Yeah.
these kind of things. And I would say like I am a huge proponent of free will, within especially within the religious, viewpoint. And this American Life episode thing rocked my world and trying to think about, okay, so if you boil it down to the genetics, um, and it is all random firing of,
Mm-hmm.
at the molecular level, um, and we are all just reacting to this without free will, then, um, like, from a free will perspective, now I'm like, how does that still happen?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so then I'm like forced to like consider the idea of the Calvinist side of things, which I've fought against basically my entire time of being in the church. And so it's created this weird like dilemma in my world,
Mm-hmm.
where I'm, wrestling with what does this look like? And like, so now from my perspective, I'm trying to answer the question of like, okay, so if this is how science is showing that the world interacts, then how does that line up with this viewpoint that I believe in?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I'm not sure I'm there yet.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't know if I'm there yet.
And I'm not sure
But
if you ever necessarily have to
no,
get there either.
no. But it makes you wrestle with it.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever read the book Flatland?
Mm-mm.
So it's this like weird fictional mathematical short story. It's not very long, but it talks about. I mean, the general idea is that a two-dimensional world interacting with a three-dimensional being and
Mm.
how those things would kind of play out. And I know a lot of like string theorists believe, in tons of dimensions.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you start considering those things that are unknown, I feel like that interaction at the molecular level is probably a lot more diverse than we can look at it right now,
Sure.
which is at this point the only solace I'm finding in any of this.
Yeah.
But, when you start taking some of those ideas into consideration of things that we're pretty sure are in our world, but
Mm-hmm.
we have no understanding of how they all operate, that, makes me still lean on the idea that, we do have choices and we do have free will and
Mm-hmm.
all those kind of things.
And I think one thing to really point out too is that this, when we talk about the science of this, um, it's something that's ongoing and increasing our understanding of it. It's not like settled anything. Like
Oh, yeah.
it's always science can only take you to a certain point
Right.
because the whole point of science is to come up with falsifiable claims that you can test and then you reach a certain point where there's certain claims and questions that you can't really falsify, and there's not really a way to test for it. And that's where we end up with this kind of gray area of where we're struggling with right now, basically.
Right.
And I think that's kind of uh, one of the reasons where this is the term that's always kind of used is that's where the God of the gaps comes in, right?
Mm,
Like here's our understanding, here's where we want to get to, and in between is I don't know,
right.
and some people attribute to God, some people are okay with just going, I don't know,
Right.
and it's okay to be both, right?
Right.
Like because there's only so much that we actually can know, and we can't look into the future, we can't go back to the past. I think that's part of the other free will side of things that people like to say, like, well, knowing everything I know now, if I went back into the past, I could have done X, Y, and Z, and my life would have been this.
Right.
And you can't make that claim at all.
Yeah.
Like it's almost pointless to even bring up.
Right. Yeah, that hypothetical. existence is a lesson in futility.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't do much
It's
for you.
it's the conversation you have after while you're in college in your dorm room after like a 6-pack of PBR, and you're like, man, let me tell you, those types of conversations. Not too
Yeah.
far off from this.
Yeah, I was
But
going to say basically how this whole thing started, right?
right.
We could solve the world's problems if we just sat in front of microphones and drank alcohol.
Dude, we should start a podcast.
And here we are.
Yeah.
But maybe it was meant to be.
Maybe.
So I guess, I mean, this is definitely a topic where I feel like we haven't solved anything.
Well, I mean, we don't really solve anything with this. Otherwise,
that's true.
We'd probably get paid a lot more to do it.
Paid something.
Yeah. I think ultimately, like, free will is something that we'd like to think exists.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's core to our identities as human beings that think that we have some autonomy to impact the way things happen. Otherwise, why would we do it in anyway?
Right.
But at the end of the day, like, it's really hard to make the case for it. You know what I mean? Like everything we've been talking about, whether it's something that God willed, if it's something that our genetics willed, if it's something that the environment that we were raised in willed. Yeah. So here we are in that lumpy gray area that doesn't really make much sense. So,
but the funny thing to me is that when you look at, like, science is so based around observation.
Sure.
And when you look at the way that we as humans live out our lives, like, I feel like in general it argues towards free will. Like, when you watch kids do stupid stuff, like when you watch all of that play out, like, it's hard to go like, yeah, nope, they were destined to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this weird, like, fight against kind of what scientific reason at one level makes sense, and then science at an observation level kind of contends against that. But I definitely, it's a weird gray.
Yeah.
I have no idea what we're talking about.
Well, and I think, like, just to kind of go off what you're saying, like, if science could actually predict everything, like if we created a technology that could predict exactly, say, like, we have a machine that we set off in the corner over here, and we do our podcast, and then this machine does this, like, big printout, and it does, like, word for word of everything we just said, then we've reached that point of being like, okay, yeah, free will doesn't exist.
Right.
But I still think there's that gap in our understanding of everything at the moment where we're not to that point.
Right.
And I don't know if we ever will get to that point. And until we are to that point, there's that gap of understanding that we could attribute to free will, if you want to just give it a name. I guess is the best way to describe it.
Yeah, the lack of understanding that we have for that.
Yeah.
Well, since we didn't solve this problem, should we try to tackle a real world problem?
Well, yeah, and I think we should also admit that we didn't solve another problem in our last episode either. So in our last episode, we tried to tackle the long-standing, deeply embedded, highly polarizing debate about which way toilet paper goes, over or under. And obviously, we both come from the over school of thought. We, I think, had a decent solution, and then Ty had to go out and travel to a whole other country and come back with a way better one that we really should have thought of.
It was the greatest solution ever. I went to the Dominican Republic, and they do not mount their toilet paper horizontal. They just mount their toilet paper vertical. So there is no over-under, and it's just as convenient to get to it.
Yeah.
But it takes away all the debate there.
And it gets rid of that stupid springy thing in between your toilet paper, too, the holder for it.
Yeah. You just slide it over the top and let gravity do the work. It is a way better solution.
Yeah.
So.
And there's also the bidet too.
Yeah, there is that. There is that. I actually stayed at a vacation rental by owner that had a bidet, and he had the greatest like 12-step process to using it and not freaking out about it, and like it was a good moment.
Yeah,
But yeah,
it is a very American thing
yeah,
that we're not used to having water go up our bums.
yeah. No, it's not a normal thing
No,
for us. So. But that's not the problem we're addressing
no,
today.
no.
So we were talking a little. So I mean, obviously, you owned a bar for a
Mm,
while, so you were kind of in that service industry work. I spent a while working in restaurants, performing, but largely salary based on tipping.
sure.
And so we were talking about the idea of how do you solve the crappy tipper,
Yeah, there's
basically?
one in every crowd, right?
Yeah.
Like and before I even asked Ty too, I wanted to make sure that he wasn't a bad tipper, so I kind of asked him like, "What are your thoughts on tipping?" You know, and fortunately, we both kind of reside on the same side of over tipping. Like I'm the type of person that starts at 20%. Um, if you meet my expectations, I most likely will just round up above 20%. If you're really, 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 really bad, I might just stay at 20% or fudge under it, you know.
Right.
I've never well, I shouldn't say never. I think I've not tipped once, and it was mostly because someone just like straight up ignored me, and I was like, "Well, okay, well,
Right.
I'd like to pay for my food," so I put down what I know the cost of the food was, and maybe it was a little bit over
Right.
to cover taxes, but yeah, there's someone that just like straight up ignored me, and that was the only time I've never tipped. But for the most part, like I always try to leave a decent tip, just because my understanding and what I know for those people that work their asses off and they don't get paid, you know, the same sort of wage that traditional wage labor does. And I always feel that going a little bit over is where most people should be, but I know that's not the case.
Right.
There's always someone that will just leave a buck,
Right.
or no matter what it is, like no
Mhm.
matter what the price of their meal was or how many drinks they have, they'll just like throw a buck down or
Yeah.
something like that. Um, and it's really annoying, especially with if you're in a group of people and you know who the bad tipper is, you know?
So for me, the like, I don't think she listens to this, so I think I'm safe. But like, and this is, I'm pretty sure generational, but like, my mom and grandma are not good tippers. Like,
Oh,
it is definitely like, and they're very money conscious, like
hmm,
very kind of like that depression era, like
sure.
kind of idea. And so I don't know if that's where it comes from, or if it's
Hmm,
just a like, what. But I'm always like, I'll like leave extra cash on the table after we leave, kind of
mm-hmm,
thing, in certain
mm-hmm.
instances, because I'm like, yeah, no, that wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And so,
And I'm actually, so my parents are actually really good tippers. They were the ones who kind of like taught me how to tip.
huh,
Like they sat down and showed me the math behind it and all
right,
that. But when you're talking about being like hardwired to do it, uh, I've always found myself like when I'm even like picking up food, like not being served in a restaurant, but I'm just getting pickup food, to go. Uh, they'll have that space for the tip, and I'll start filling it out. I'm like, wait, I didn't actually
yeah,
have service where they
right,
deserve a tip, and where does that money go now? Like I didn't
yeah,
have a server. Is it something that just like they split up with the kitchen? So
right,
yeah. So yeah, well, I'm glad that you're a good tipper
yeah,
because
yeah.
I get really judgy on that too.
Yeah, there's definitely uh especially I think that may be it for both well, except you're saying you were predetermined
I
to know how
was.
to do this, but like for me, I'm not sure
Nurture.
I totally understood like everything that goes into the process until I was kind of working in the service industry.
Sure.
And then once you experience that, you're like, holy crap, these people do not get paid enough.
Right.
Like to deal with the ridiculous requests and all of that stuff. Like
Hmm.
they deserve this.
Mm-hmm.
So now, how do we solve this?
So, and this is kind of funny too, because we just talked about, the bidet being a very non-American thing, and tipping is actually a very American thing,
Right.
like it's actually something that across the world, uh, the understanding is that you just pay people a wage, right?
Right.
And there's no need for the pressure of worrying about whether someone is worthy of a certain tip or not. Um, but at the end of the day, though, like when you're talking about how hard these people work and how they don't get paid enough, you can do really well if you're a good bartender and a good waitress.
Oh yeah.
We the folks at our bar, they'd work their asses off, but they would pull in enough money just working like a 3 or 4 day week that gave them a pretty comfortable lifestyle too.
Right.
Not saying they were like rich by
Right.
any means, but uh, I think if you actually introduce the idea of just a standard wage for them without the tips, they may push back on that because there's some times where they probably make more money by the hour than what they could guarantee for a certain wage too.
Right. I think that would be the interesting conversation to have would be with servers and
Mm-hmm.
bartenders. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you could get paid, a fairly significant amount over minimum wage
Mm-hmm.
for doing the same job, would you want to take that hourly rate and
Mm-hmm.
eliminate all tips, or would you rather deal with crappy tippers
Mm-hmm.
and see how it all plays out?
Yeah.
So would you rather take predetermined amount,
Yeah.
or would you rather take free will,
right?
and
Wow,
leave it?
that came
Oh
full
man,
circle.
we got it back to start.
Yeah.
So
And I think the funny part about that too, if you actually like sat down and asked servers like, what did you make in tips? There's also a side of them too where they underreport
oh yeah,
what they make just for taxing purposes.
right,
So you'd have to make sure whatever they report back to you is like completely anonymous because
yeah,
otherwise they're like, I'm not letting the government know what I made.
yeah,
And I don't blame them. So yeah, I think that it would take a lot of, and there are restaurants nowadays that are doing that type of business model, right?
hmm
I don't know how widespread it is or how many there are, but there are people that are adopting this no tip culture. And they make sure to put it like on their menus, up on the walls. Like
right,
I don't know if they require their waitresses to tattoo it on their foreheads or not. Like don't tip me, but
yeah,
there is a push now where there is a growth in that, and I think there are some people who are finding that that is a something more preferable too because they have more predictability about their income. Because that
right,
is one thing that you can't figure out in terms of what when you're in the service industry of how much money am I going to make and what does that look like as far as my bills are concerned, and they don't have the safeguards for like paid leave or anything of that nature too.
right,
So there's payoffs one way or another,
yeah.
and I think really ultimately it's a matter about if you have both those options available to you, then you can have the free will to make that choice about which way you want to go, right?
That's right. So if you're in the service industry and you actually listen to this, give us some insight.
Yeah.
How would you solve the crappy tipper issue?
Mm-hmm.
Or would you even try and
Yeah.
just deal with the fact that there's going to be over tippers and under tippers, and in the end it all
Yeah.
works out?
I do say though, if I know if I'm in a group with bad tippers, I do tend to leave a
Yeah.
couple extra more bucks on the table.
Yep, I over tip at
Yeah.
that point as well.
Yeah.
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 So, all right, well, sign us off for this week.
Thanks again for listening to A Christian and Atheist Walk Into a Bar. Make sure you're following us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those wonderful places. And you can also check us out at christianatheist.com. And we're available, as always, on iTunes, Stitcher, and every other place where you can get your podcast on. And make sure you leave us a review. Make sure you're following us and also giving us feedback, too. And that's in all those different places. We'd like to hear from you. and that's where we get our best ideas from. So
That's right.
until then, we are here solving the world's problems one adult beverage at a time.
That's right. Cheers.
Cheers. That was a good ring.
That was a great ring.